The stars had never seemed so cold to Cole as they did on that seventh day aboard Nexus Station. She stood before the observation window, watching the distant lights of 1,000 suns, wondering if the beings she had come to negotiate with truly understood what peace could mean for both their peoples. For 7 days, the talks had gone well. The delegates had smiled with their strange, angular faces. They had nodded their large heads and spoken of cooperation. They had promised recognition of human territory in exchange for shared technology. Had begun to believe that perhaps, after 2 centuries of quiet expansion through the galaxy, humanity had finally found its place among the stars. She was wrong. Admiral found her at the window just as the first alarm began to sound. His face was pale, his hands steady, but his eyes filled with something had never seen in the old soldier before. Fear. "Ambassador," he said, his voice low and urgent, "we need to move now." Before could respond, the station shook violently. Through the observation window, she saw them, dozens of warships, appearing from nowhere as their cloaking fields dropped away. They surrounded Nexus Station like wolves circling wounded prey. Dr. Laura came running down the corridor, her datapad clutched to her chest. She had warned them. For years she had studied and she had always said they could not be trusted. No one had listened. "The station's security forces are overwhelmed," Laura reported, breathing hard. "Soldiers are boarding through the lower docks." Reached for his sidearm but stopped him with a gentle hand on his arm. There were too many of them. Fighting here would only get them killed, and dead diplomats could not help their people. The doors at the end of the corridor burst open. Soldiers poured through, their weapons raised, their dark eyes gleaming with something that might have been triumph. Behind them walked Fleet Commander, the leader of the delegation. He had sat across from for 7 days, speaking of peace and friendship. Now he looked at her the way a hunter looks at captured prey. "Ambassador Cole," said, his translator rendering his words in cold, precise English, "I do hope you will not resist. It would be unfortunate if humanity's representative were to die before witnessing what comes next." Stood tall, she would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. "What have you done, Commander?" Smiled, it was not a pleasant expression. "What we have always done, Ambassador. What we have done to 37 species before yours. We have shown you your true place in the galaxy." He gestured to one of his officers, who activated a holographic display. Felt her heart stop as the images appeared before her. Earth's colonies, 17 of them. She recognized New Boston with its beautiful glass towers. She saw the agricultural world of Haven, where millions of families had built new lives. She watched as warships descended upon each world, their weapons firing without mercy or warning. The images showed cities burning, ships exploding as they tried to flee, people running through streets filled with smoke and fire, only to be cut down by weapons fire from above. 3 billion people, men, women, and children, families who had been eating dinner, children who had been playing in parks, workers who had been building a future among the stars, all of them dead or dying as watched. Laura turned away, unable to look. Stood rigid, his jaw clenched so tight thought it might break. She herself felt something cold settle into her chest, something that went beyond grief or horror. It was the feeling of a door closing forever. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "We came here in good faith, we wanted peace." Laughed, "Peace? You misunderstand, Ambassador. The strong do not make peace with the weak. They make examples. Your species spread too quickly, built too much, dreamed too boldly. The hegemony could not allow such a threat to grow unchecked." He stepped closer, his towering form casting a shadow over. "You have 72 hours to convince your government to surrender. Complete and unconditional surrender. Your military will be dismantled. Your colonies will become hegemony territory. Your people will serve thee as all conquered species serve us." "And if we refuse?" asked, his voice hard as iron. turned to look at the old admiral with something like amusement. "Then we will continue what we have started. Earth itself will burn. Every human colony will be reduced to ash. Your species will become a memory, a cautionary tale told to other young civilizations who might dare to defy the natural order." Looked at the images still floating in the air before her. She looked at the burning cities, the fleeing ships, the bodies in the streets. She thought of the families who had trusted their government to keep them safe. She thought of the children who would never grow up, the dreams that would never be fulfilled, the futures that had been stolen in a single night of fire and blood. And somewhere deep inside her, beneath the grief and the horror and the cold weight of despair, something else began to stir. Something old. Something that had kept humanity alive through ice ages and plagues, through wars and famines, through every catastrophe that had ever threatened to wipe them from existence. She did not let see it. She kept her face calm, her eyes steady. But inside, Cole began to understand what was coming next. Across the galaxy, the other species watched. The ancient and wise observed the attack with grave concern. The long enslaved by the wondered if this new species would suffer the same fate. The myriad collective calculated probabilities and predicted humanity's swift defeat. None of them understood what they were truly witnessing. They had attacked humanity believing them to be weak. They had seen a young species, barely 2 centuries in space, and assumed they would break like all the others. They had studied human technology, human military strength, human population numbers, and concluded that victory was certain. They had not studied human history. They had not learned about Thermopylae or Stalingrad. They had not read about the London Blitz or the Warsaw Uprising. They did not know that this species had spent 10,000 years fighting against impossible odds, surviving when survival seemed impossible, rising again and again from the ashes of their own destruction. The thought they knew what they were dealing with. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Earth went silent. For 48 hours after the ultimatum, no message came from humanities, no desperate pleas for mercy, no angry declarations of defiance, no diplomatic overtures or requests for negotiation, just silence, vast and deep as the void between stars. Fleet Commander paced the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Conquest, growing more unsettled with each passing hour. This was not how conquered species behaved. They had begged for mercy within hours of their defeat. They had offered tribute and submission before the first week ended. Every species the hegemony had crushed over 10,000 years had responded with predictable terror. But not the humans. His communications officer reported the same thing every hour. No transmissions from Earth, no responses to any hails. The human government had simply stopped talking. "Perhaps they are in chaos," suggested his second-in-command, a younger named. "Perhaps their leadership has collapsed under the weight of what we have done." Wished he could believe that, but his intelligence networks were reporting strange things. Human civilian vessels were not fleeing in panic. They were moving with purpose, evacuating to predetermined locations deep within protected space. Human military assets were repositioning, but their movements made no tactical sense. They were not preparing to defend or to attack. They were simply waiting. And there were other reports. Whispers from deep space monitoring stations. Energy readings from hidden locations throughout human territory. Something massive was being assembled in the Sol system, but no probe could get close enough to see what it was. Ordered Ambassador Cole brought to his private chamber. Perhaps she could explain what her people were doing. Entered under armed guard, her wrists bound but her head held high. She had not broken despite 2 days of captivity. If anything, she seemed calmer than before, as if she knew something did not. "Your government has not responded to our demands," said, studying her face for any sign of weakness. "The deadline approaches. Do they not understand what will happen if they refuse?" Smiled. It was a small expression, barely visible, but it sent a chill through that he did not understand. "Oh, they understand, Commander. They understand perfectly." "Then why do they not respond? Why do they not beg for their lives as every other species has done?" Was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "Do you know what makes humanity different from the other species you have conquered?" Leaned forward, curious despite himself. "Enlighten me." "We have been preparing for this moment for 200 years, said. Not because we wanted war. We reached out to every species we encountered with offers of friendship and trade. We hoped, truly hoped, that we could find our place in this galaxy through peace." She paused and her eyes met directly. "But we are not a naive species, Commander. We have a saying on Earth: hope for the best, prepare for the worst. For 2 centuries, while we smiled and traded and negotiated, we also built. We prepared. We made ourselves ready for the day when someone would try to do exactly what you have done." Felt something cold settle in his chest. "You are bluffing. We have studied your military capabilities. We know the strength of your fleet, the size of your armies, the limits of your technology. You cannot defeat the hegemony." Smile widened. "You studied what we showed you, Commander. You saw what we wanted you to see." Before could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. His communications officer's voice came through the intercom, trembling with something that sounded like terror. "Commander, we're receiving reports from across our occupation zones. Something is happening, something impossible." Rushed to the bridge, dragging with him. What he saw on the tactical display made his blood run cold. Across human space, massive structures were emerging from hidden locations. They rose from asteroids, from the cores of dead moons, from rogue planets drifting in the darkness between stars. They were enormous, each one stretching over 40 kilometers long, and they moved with a speed and grace that should have been impossible for ships of their size. "What are those?" whispered. Stood beside, watching the display with quiet satisfaction. "We call them Sentinels. We have been building them in secret for over a century, hidden in places your probes could never find. They are not just warships, Commander. They are a message." A message could not tear his eyes from the screen. 17 of these massive vessels, each one larger than anything the hegemony had ever built. A message that says we will never be conquered, never be enslaved, never submit. His voice hardened. "You killed 3 billion of our people, Commander, children, families, innocent civilians who had never raised a hand against anyone. Did you think we would simply surrender after that?" On Earth, Secretary of Defense Perry stood in the Emergency War Council chamber, surrounded by the highest military and civilian leaders of human civilization. General Christopher Hayes had just finished presenting the activation protocols for Project Blackout, the contingency plan that generations of leaders had hoped would never be needed. The vote was unanimous. Looked at the men and women around him. He saw grief in their eyes, grief for the billions already lost. But he also saw something else, a determination that went beyond anger, beyond vengeance, a cold, clear purpose that would not be. "Send the signal," ordered. Across human space, a single coded phrase was transmitted through channels that did not know existed. It reached every human military installation, every hidden facility, every sleeper cell and secret outpost. "The long night begins." On the bridge of the Eternal Conquest, watched his tactical display fill with impossible readings. The human fleet was moving. The Sentinels were advancing. And from every corner of occupied space, reports were flooding in of chaos and destruction. The human infrastructure they had captured, the power grids and communication networks and transportation systems, all of it was turning against them. Occupation forces found themselves blind and deaf, as every piece of human technology revealed hidden systems designed for exactly this moment. Turn 2, understanding finally dawning in his eyes. "You planned for this, all of it, from the beginning." Nodded slowly. "We hoped we would never have to use these preparations. We truly wanted peace, Commander, but we knew that hope alone would not protect our people. Her eyes grew cold. You taught us what happens to species that trust in the mercy of others. Now we will teach you what happens when you awaken something you do not understand. The long night had begun, and before it was over, the galaxy would learn to fear a species they had fatally underestimated. Dr. Shaw had spent 30 years of his life preparing for a day he prayed would never come. He was the lead architect of humanity's Black Research Division, the man who had designed the weapons no one was supposed to know about. Now, standing in a bunker deep beneath the surface of Mars, he watched his life's work come alive. The first sentinel to engage the fleet was designated Harbinger. It emerged from a hollowed-out asteroid in the outer reaches of the Sol system, its massive form blotting out the stars as it accelerated toward the enemy formation. The commander in that sector, a veteran of dozens of conquests, ordered his ships to attack. It was the last order he ever gave. Harbinger's primary weapon was something humanity had never revealed to the galaxy, had named it the Graviton Lance, a focused pulse of gravitational force that collapsed matter into itself. When it fired, the beam was invisible to the naked eye, but its effects were not. The first battleship simply crumpled, its hull folded inward like paper being crushed in a fist. Its reactors imploded. Its crew never even had time to scream. One moment, a warship of the mighty hegemony. The next, a ball of compressed metal no larger than a house. The second ship followed, then the third, then the fourth. Watched the battle data scroll across his screens. He felt no joy in what he was seeing. These were living beings dying out there, even if they were beings who had murdered billions of innocents. But he understood the necessity of what was happening. Humanity had tried peace. They had extended their hand in friendship, and they had bitten it off. Now they would learn the cost of that choice. Across the galaxy, the other Sentinels were engaging with equal devastation. In the outer colonies, 2 Sentinels caught a supply fleet trying to retreat and destroyed it completely. Near the mining outposts of the Belt Worlds, 3 more Sentinels surrounded a battle group and annihilated it in minutes. But the Sentinels were only the beginning. On the occupied human colony of New Haven, Occupation Commander was trying to understand why nothing worked anymore. The power grid had shut down. Communications were dead. Even the doors in the human buildings refused to open for soldiers. His troops reported impossible things. Human vehicles were moving on their own, running down patrols in the streets. Security systems were targeting soldiers with perfect accuracy. Even the simple machines in factories and warehouses had become deadly traps. Had heard stories of human ingenuity, but he had dismissed them as exaggeration. Now, trapped in a dead city surrounded by machines that wanted to kill him, he began to understand the truth. Every piece of human technology left behind contained hidden systems. Every power grid, every communication network, every automated factory had been designed with secret programming that would activate in exactly this situation. They had thought they were capturing valuable infrastructure. Instead, they had inherited a trap designed by a species that had spent 2 centuries preparing for betrayal. On the bridge of his flagship, Fleet Commander watched his empire crumble in real time. Reports flooded in from across occupied space. His forces were dying by the thousands. Entire fleets were being destroyed by weapons they could not understand or counter. And the giant ships, those terrible Sentinels, seemed unstoppable. "How is this possible?" asked, his voice shaking. They were a minor power. They had only been in space for 2 centuries. How could they build all of this without us knowing? Had no answer. He had underestimated the humans. They all had. The hegemony had looked at humanity's small fleet, their modest colonies, their seemingly primitive technology, and assumed they knew everything there was to know about this species. They had not considered that humanity might be hiding its true capabilities. They had not imagined that a species could smile and trade and negotiate while secretly building weapons that could destroy empires. They had not understood that humans had learned, through 10,000 years of painful history, never to show their enemies their full strength. Cole watched from her captive position on the bridge, saying nothing. She did not gloat. She did not celebrate. 3 billion of her people were dead, and no amount of vengeance could bring them back. But she felt a grim satisfaction in knowing that their deaths would not go unanswered. The galaxy was watching. They observed through their ancient sensor networks, their wise elders growing pale with shock. The still trapped under rule began to whisper words they had never dared speak before, words like hope, words like freedom. The Myriad Collective, a vast network of machine intelligences that calculated everything in terms of probability, was forced to revise its models. The probability of humanity surviving had been calculated at less than 3%. Now, those calculations were being thrown out entirely. On Earth, General Christopher Hayes coordinated the counteroffensive from the Strategic Command Center deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. He had spent his entire career preparing for this moment, training soldiers who he hoped would never have to fight, building weapons that were meant to deter rather than destroy. That time had passed. They had made their choice, and now humanity would show them the consequences. All Sentinel commanders report combat ready, his aide reported. Fleet Admiral confirms the main battle group is in position. Ground forces are prepared to begin liberation operations on all occupied colonies. Christopher nodded slowly. He looked at the map of the galaxy displayed before him, the red markers showing forces, the blue markers showing human assets. For the first time since the attack, the blue markers outnumbered the red. "Send the order," he said quietly. "Begin the liberation. Every colony, every outpost, every world they have touched, we take them all back." Across human space the order was received, ships moved, soldiers prepared, weapons systems came online. They had thought they understood war. They had conquered dozens of species. They had crushed resistance movements and broken the spirits of entire civilizations. But they had never fought humans. They had never faced a species that had survived ice ages by refusing to give up. That had rebuilt cities after bombs reduced them to rubble. That had walked on the surface of their moon not because it was easy, but because it was hard. They believed that war was about power and dominance. They did not understand that for humans, war was about survival. And when humans fought for survival, they were capable of things that made the ancient empires of the galaxy tremble. The liberation had begun, and they were about to learn what it truly meant to anger humanity. The war lasted 23 days. 23 days from the moment humanity's silence ended to the moment the High Council begged for mercy. 23 days to dismantle an empire that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. 23 days to show the universe what happened when humanity stopped hopping for peace and started fighting for survival. Admiral stood on the bridge of the Sentinel Arbiter, watching the pale blue world of Prime turn slowly beneath him. He had been rescued from captivity on the 12th day, pulled from the flagship by Special Forces soldiers who had boarded the ship in a daring raid. Now he commanded the final phase of the human counteroffensive. 6 Sentinel dreadnoughts surrounded their weapons were charged, their targeting systems locked. One word from would reduce Prime to a dead rock, killing billions of civilians, just as they had killed billions of human civilians. He did not give that word. Instead, he waited. And in that waiting, he sent a message more terrifying than any weapon could deliver. Captain Blair led the ground assault to recover the remaining hostages. She had volunteered for this mission personally. Ambassador Cole was still alive, still held in the capital city of and intended to bring her home. Her team moved through the streets of the ancient alien city like ghosts. The military had collapsed. Most soldiers had thrown down their weapons when they saw the sentinels appear in their sky. Others had tried to fight and had been eliminated with brutal efficiency. Found no pleasure in killing. Each soldier she shot was someone's child, someone's friend, perhaps someone's parent. But she thought of the images she had seen, the burning colonies, the fleeing civilians cut down from above. She thought of the 3 billion dead, and she kept moving forward. The hostage compound was heavily guarded by the last loyal soldiers of the High Council. They refused to surrender. They knew what awaited them if humanity won, and they chose to die fighting rather than face justice. Gave them their wish. When the last guard fell, she entered the compound and found Ambassador Cole sitting calmly in her cell, as if she had been waiting for this moment all along. "Captain Blair, I presume," said, rising with dignity despite her weeks of captivity. "I was wondering when you would arrive." Almost laughed. "Ma'am, you have been a prisoner for 3 weeks. How are you so calm?" Smiled, "Because I knew you would come. I know my people, Captain. I always knew you would come." On the bridge of the Arbiter, received word that the hostages were secure, all of them alive. They had not harmed them, perhaps hoping to use them as bargaining chips. That hope had been foolish. Now came the moment had been waiting for. The High Council had sent message after message, begging for negotiation. They offered to return all occupied territories. They offered reparations beyond counting. They offered to sign any treaty, accept any terms, do anything humanity demanded. Had not responded until now. He activated the broadcast system that would send his words across the galaxy. Every species, every world, every ship with a receiver would hear what he was about to say. 23 days ago, he began, his voice calm and measured, the hegemony murdered 3 billion human civilians. Men, women, and children who had never raised a hand in violence against anyone. Families who were eating dinner when the bombs fell. Children who were playing in parks when the warships appeared. He paused, letting the words sink in. We did not start this war. We came to Nexus Station seeking peace. We extended our hand in friendship, and they answered with fire and blood. On Prime, the High Council watched from their underground bunkers. They had spent 10,000 years as the undisputed masters of the galaxy. Now they huddled in the dark, waiting to learn if their species would survive. We could destroy your world, continued. Our weapons are locked on your cities. One command and Prime would burn as our colonies burned. It would be justice in the eyes of many. An eye for an eye, a species for a species. The council members held their breath. But that is not who we are. Looked at the tactical display, at the weapons that could end the species with a thought. Then he looked away. Humanity did not come to the stars to conquer. We did not build these weapons to destroy. We built them so that no one could ever do to us what you tried to do. We built them so that we could never be enslaved. He turned to the communications officer. Target the orbital monuments. The officer hesitated for only a moment. Then she entered the commands. Above Prime, the Sentinels adjusted their aim. Their weapons pointed not at the planet below, but at the ancient stations orbiting above it. These were the sacred monuments of the civilization, built over 10. They contained the cultural heritage of an entire species. Historical archives reaching back to the dawn of their race. Religious artifacts considered holy by billions. The Sentinels fired. In seconds, it was over. 10,000 years of history, erased in beams of gravitational force. The monuments crumpled and collapsed, their contents destroyed beyond any hope of recovery. The High Council watched in horror. Their history was gone. Their culture, their heritage, everything that made them who they were, vanished in moments. Consider that mercy, said quietly. We took your past. We could have taken your future. Remember that when you think about what you did to us. The surrender came within the hour, complete and unconditional as humanity had demanded. They had no choice. They had seen what human weapons could do. They had watched their empire crumble in less than a month. and they had learned, finally, that some species should not be provoked. Cole stood on the bridge beside as the surrender transmission arrived. She felt no joy. How could she? 3 billion of her people were still dead. Nothing would bring them back. But she felt something else. A grim satisfaction that their deaths meant something. That humanity would never again be seen as prey by the predators of the galaxy. "What happens now?" she asked. Turned to look at her, his eyes tired but determined. "Now we make sure this never happens again, to us or anyone else." Nodded. She had come to Nexus Station seeking peace. She had found war instead. But perhaps from the ashes of that war, a true peace could finally be built. A peace based not on the mercy of the strong, but on the strength of those who refused to be victims. The reckoning was complete. Now came the harder task, building something better from the ruins. 6 months had passed since the surrender. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have imagined. The Treaty of Sol was signed aboard the Sentinel Arbiter, in orbit above the blue jewel of Earth. Representatives from 47 species gathered to witness the moment. Some came willingly, eager to see the birth of a new era. Others came reluctantly, afraid of what humanity might do next. All of them came understanding that the old order was dead, and something new was being born in its place. Cole, now Secretary General of the United Stellar Coalition, stood at the podium of the Great Assembly Chamber. She looked out at the gathered representatives, at the strange faces and stranger forms of beings from across the galaxy. Some were ancient, members of species that had traveled the stars when humanity was still learning to use fire. Others were young, their civilizations barely older than humanity's own. All of them watched her with the same expression, fear mixed with hope, uncertainty about what the future would bring. Understood that fear. She had felt it herself in the dark days aboard Nexus Station, when she had watched her people die and wondered if her species would survive. But she had also learned something in those dark days. Fear could be a teacher if you let it. It could show you what you truly valued, what you were willing to fight for, what kind of future you wanted to build. She began to speak. 6 months ago, the hegemony attacked humanity without warning or provocation. They killed 3 billion of our people, civilians who had never harmed anyone, families who wanted nothing more than to live their lives in peace. They did this because they believed that the galaxy belongs to the strong, and that the weak exist only to serve or to die. She paused, letting her words echo through the chamber. We proved them wrong. The representatives stirred uncomfortably. They had all seen the images of the war. They had watched the Sentinels tear through the fleet. They had witnessed the systematic destruction of an empire that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. But we did not fight that war for vengeance, continued. We did not build our weapons to conquer. We built them because we understood something that the never did. True strength does not come from dominating others. It comes from protecting what you love. She looked at Admiral, who stood at the edge of the chamber with Dr. Laura beside him. They had been through so much together. The betrayal at Nexus Station, the weeks of captivity, the terrible war that followed. Now they stood as witnesses to what they had helped create. Humanity came to the stars hopping to find friends, said. We found a galaxy ruled by fear. A galaxy where the strong preyed upon the weak, where peace was merely the pause between conquests, where species survived only by bowing to those with bigger weapons. Her voice hardened. That ends now. She outlined what humanity was proposing. A true galactic government based on mutual respect and collective security. An alliance where every species had a voice, where conflicts were resolved through negotiation rather than war, where the weak were protected by the strong rather than exploited by them. And at the center of it all, the Sentinels would remain, not as weapons of conquest but as guarantors of peace. Any species that attacked another unprovoked would face the same response they had faced. No exceptions, no mercy. We are offering you a choice, concluded. The old way, where might makes right and the strong take what they want, Or a new way where we stand together, where we protect each other, where we build something better than what came before. She fell silent. The chamber was quiet. The representatives looked at each other, uncertain what to do. For thousands of years they had set the rules of galactic civilization. The strong conquered, the weak submitted. That was simply how things worked. But they were gone now. Their hegemony was dissolved. Their leaders were facing trial for war crimes. Their empire had been swept away by a species that had seemed so small, so insignificant, so easy to destroy. The first to rise was a representative of a small being with delicate features and large, dark eyes. They had been enslaved by for 3,000 years. They had been forced to serve, to labor, to die at the command of their masters. "The stand with humanity," the representative said, their voice trembling with emotion. "We have dreamed of this moment for generations. We never dared believe it could come true." Others followed. The ancient and wise who had watched this rise with growing concern and now saw a chance for something better. The myriad collective who had calculated that this new order offered the highest probability of long-term stability and peace. Species that had been conquered, species that had been threatened, species that had lived in fear for as long as anyone could remember. Within an hour, 32 species had pledged their support. More would follow in the days and weeks ahead, not because they feared humanity, but because they finally saw a chance for a galaxy where fear was not the only law. Watched from the back of the chamber, a tired smile on his face. Laura stood beside him, her datapad already full of notes for the diplomatic initiatives she would lead. "Do you think it will work?" Laura asked quietly. Considered the question. He thought of the war they had just fought, the weapons they had used, the terrible power humanity now wielded. Power that could destroy civilizations or protect them, depending on how it was used. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know we have to try. We proved we can destroy our enemies. Now we have to prove we can build something worth protecting." Laura nodded. She looked at, still standing at the podium as representatives lined up to pledge their support. The young ambassador who had gone to Nexus Station hopping for peace had become something more. A leader, a symbol, a promise of what the future could hold. Across the galaxy the news spread. The hegemony was gone. Humanity had risen. And a new order was being born, built not on conquest and fear, but on cooperation and mutual protection. It would not be easy. There would be challenges and setbacks, conflicts and crises. Building a peaceful galaxy was harder than winning a war. But for the first time in 10,000 years, the species of the galaxy had hope. Humanity had wanted peace. They had reached out with open hands, hopping to find friends among the stars. When that hope was betrayed, they had shown the galaxy what they could do when pushed to the edge. Now they would show the galaxy what they could build when given the chance. The long night had ended. The new dawn had begun.